Alright guys, talk about the Formula 1 news. We are 1 week away from the start of the first official pre-season test in Bahrain, but after the Barcelona shakedown test, Red Bull certainly discovered some things on their engine that may well need addressing. There was talk about overheating the other day. Now there's talk about some potential serious lag in the engine, which caused some spins and even some crashes that we saw in Barcelona. Can they resolve this in time for the season? Will it affect Verstappen's chances this year, or will he be good enough to handle the drama? Very much interested in your thoughts on the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. A few things on Williams to start out with here. They are set to turn up to Bahrain on the Tuesday. So, it's the 11th of February, 1 week today. That is the first day of the first official pre-season test. Obviously, they did, Mercedes' case anyway, 500 odd laps of running in Barcelona. So, look, there's been plenty of testing, but crucially, different type of testing when it comes to fuels, as we shall discuss once again in the coming minutes. Williams didn't turn up to Barcelona. Their car wasn't ready in time. James Vowles has admitted that was far from intentional. They pushed the limits. They tried to be very aggressive. They messed a few things up. To our understanding, they probably messed up a couple of crash tests, and that's why things took longer than they initially expected, probably. That could mean that they're going to be substantially overweight, but it's all a little bit unclear what that really looks like. What we do believe is that while every team is going to turn up next Wednesday for the start of the test, Wednesday through Friday, I think fans are allowed there on only the Thursday and the Friday, and it's only going to get broadcast for like the final hour of all of the 3 days. It's all rather confusing. But look, the cars were surprisingly reliable in Barcelona. That may not be the case in Bahrain, and we'll get into the reasons why. But Williams looking to get some running in before they hit the track for the first time, an extra 200-kilometre filming day. They will look to do that the day before on the Tuesday, it seems. James Vowles says you've got to deal with failure in order to take advantage of it, or whatever he says, to drive the change. Now, Williams submitted their technical sheet, and we saw it publicly. They had outlined the minimum weight as 772.4 kilograms. Mercedes had given a figure at 772. Ferrari had given a figure at 770. And this was all rather confusing because the minimum we thought was 768. It's actually either 770 or 772, depending on the conditions. So the realization here appears to be that the figures the teams have submitted are their interpretation of the actual minimum weight rather than the weight of their cars, because there was some reaction to this yesterday. People were saying, oh, I can't believe people said that Williams were, 30 kilograms over the weight limit. I don't know if they are either, but I'm pretty certain their car doesn't weigh this. And also, James Vowles said the other day that I don't know what it weighs, which I don't really believe. But, whatever the case is, these figures are effectively placeholder figures. And people have figured out why over the last couple of days. De Kester makes it clear. So the minimum weight is defined as like 724 or 726, depending on race or qualifying, plus the weight of the tyres. And the weight of the tyres was expected to be 44 kilograms. It's actually more like 46. So when you add the numbers up, the effective minimum weight of the cars is 770 or 772. And the teams are signing off that figure rather than telling the rivals what the car actually weighs. Now, this is more in line with what we expected. We were talking for a long time here on this channel that we were expecting it to be a real challenge for the teams to get down to the minimum weight. Some may have achieved it. There's talk about Audi might be nearly there. There's talk about, was it Alpine might be in the mix as well. Mercedes might not be a million miles away. We think Aston Martin are probably quite significantly over for the start of the season. There's other teams in that conversation as well. Even Ferrari we'll look at. And then you would certainly think Williams. Why would they be delayed, given that there's been strong indications they probably failed one too many crash tests in terms of their preparation? Probably had to beef up the car. It would be a surprise, given all the complexity of this new era and the challenge of getting down to a weight limit significantly lower than last year, if the teams are pretty much all there, right, within just a few kg. That would be surprising for the start of the new regs. It certainly wasn't the case in 2022. Some cars were substantially overweight at the start of those regs. It would be a surprise if it's not the same story yet again. So that's as far as we understand. One of the other key dramas of the day is on this Mercedes compression ratio power unit trick. So we know that a substantial number of teams, basically everyone not called Mercedes, apart from maybe Bull Powertrains, are not very happy about them supposedly using some very clever engineering to rekindle the dream of the 18:1 compression ratio limit, which is not allowed in this new era. The limit is 16:1, but it's only tested at ambient temperatures when the engine is cold, and all this type of stuff. So as a result, we think Mercedes are gaining some advantage, quite significant advantage this would be in the internal combustion engine. Red Bull, we thought, might have found a solution here as well, but AMUS say that they probably understand what to do. They just can't make it work reliably. So again, this went from being a kind of far-fetched almost rumor in the early days to now being talked about effectively as a fact that Mercedes have this ability to gain a substantial performance advantage. Now, the other day, we talked about the comment. Toto Wolff was furious with the rivals that are constantly trying to find a way out of this dilemma where their engine isn't going to be good enough. Toto Wolff says they're trying to find excuses, get their act together, is what he said in rather harsher terms, and said that they're trying to come up with stuff that doesn't exist. They're trying to send, notes and minutes and have phone calls behind closed doors without the other power unit manufacturers being there to try and manufacture some sort of narrative, right? So Toto was very strongly worded, let's say, in his discussion of this. And you might wonder why Toto was responding in that way if he wasn't somewhat nervous about the other teams maybe having a successful challenge. Now again, Mercedes will say that we worked closely with the FIA to develop this engine. They said it was fine, and therefore it's fine. The other teams will say, well, look, there's this rule, section 5, whatever it is, that says all the cars must comply with all the rules at all the times. And also, if Mercedes are substantially ahead, then, the other teams are cooked, right? I mean, Honda, Adrian, you might have cooked up a phenomenal car with the aero side, but if Honda's power unit is nowhere near Mercedes because they're exploiting this trick that other teams aren't doing, then the season's over. Audi, similar story for them. Audi also have quite a bit of sway because they came in on this whole electrical thing. They were very keen to come in as a result. They've now got like a full works team taking over Sauber. They are a big player, and also they're a big rival in theory to Mercedes. Probably not yet performance-wise, but at some point there is that whole German thing that they're trying to push. But apparently Audi and Honda are joining forces legally, and they are getting the lawyers involved here and are invoking some sort of breach of the entry conditions. Because, of course, Audi came in, Honda came back with these new engine rules in mind. The idea that Mercedes are exploiting some sort of grey area and gaining an unfair advantage, that's left Audi and Honda thinking, well, why did we even come back in the first place? Is there some sort of legal challenge we can make against Mercedes here? Of course, the chances of the FIA saying, all right, Toto, yeah, nice comments, but we're actually going to ban your car this season until you change the engine and all of your customer cars, it's just not going to happen. But Audi and Honda are making it hard work, it seems, for Mercedes, and therefore, given that it's unlikely that an easy solution will be reached, there is a possibility of greater advantages in the ADUO system, which is quite ominous, again, for this Mercedes power unit. This means additional development and upgrade opportunities. Effectively, at 6 races and then 12 races or something into the season, they test the engines on a test bed, and if an engine is within, like, outside of 2% of the performance of the leading engine, let's just presume that's Mercedes, then they get quite substantial additional development resources. If it's 4% outside, then they get that on steroids, basically. So there is an argument that maybe the teams will be told, well, yeah, sure, but the solution is we're going to give you more testing time to catch up rather than tell Mercedes to stop. Which, well, by the time they do catch up, either the FIA will have changed their mind and banned what Mercedes are trying to do and found another way to resolve it, But as we said the other day, to put a sensor in the car and test it while it's hot and it's running, that requires unanimous agreement from the teams, and Mercedes aren't going to be on board with that, one would imagine. So there's a few options here. The conclusion appears to be Mercedes are very well positioned. The other argument has been, James Vowles made this point, that the teams are just talking a big game against the Mercedes engine stuff because they know they're probably on the back foot, so they're trying to find any angle, even if the Mercedes engine advantage isn't really all that big of a deal. Now let's talk briefly about the Aston Martin. There was one further comment that I meant to mention yesterday, but I forgot to. Newey said in that big article that we read that the model of the car did not arrive into the wind tunnel until middle of April. So this is the point. Newey arrived in I think it was the 1st of March 2025. Newey officially joined Aston Martin. Then it was only the middle of April that they were probably able to get their car into the wind tunnel. So this set them back by several months. And those will be months not easy to make up by any means. And that's why things were delayed. But also, look, have Aston Martin managed to fit 16 months of work into 8 months when other teams have fit 12 months into 12 months? Who knows? Maybe it's possible. But that is the update on the Aston Martin side. The other key question on Aston Martin was what fuel they were using in Barcelona. Now, there was this article here that implied that Aston were using the new fuels, but I'm not sure that's really the case, and I'm not sure the article actually says that really, or certainly Newey didn't say that specifically in what it appears that article was referencing. The bottom line is, Auto Racer confirmed it from their understanding. The fuels in Barcelona used were a hybrid fuel based on fossil fuels. They differ from the new fuels both in their chemistry and the production method. They were the same ones used last year to test the ICEs on the test bench. So very interesting. We did hear rumours about this the other day. It now appears to be effectively a fact that indeed, yes, they are using the older hybrid kind of fuels, and that's what they're running in Barcelona. So that therefore raises some very serious questions, right? What does it look like when they actually run the proper fuels? The engines were very reliable, more reliable than we expected. But these fuels are very different. They're either synthetic or they're biofuels, which is what Shell and Ferrari are using, which will probably differ somewhat in terms of compounds compared to what you would expect from petroleum and the updates that we have seen to that in recent years. So, look, on fuel, Aramco might or might not have a slight edge. The key for Aston Martin will be the development. They think they've built a car with a ton of potential. Ferrari also did not use the new fuels. There was a question, did Aston actually use them, and that's why they were limiting their power and not running at full whack? We don't know. I think probably not, and we will see in Bahrain what things really look like. But I definitely would expect reliability in Bahrain to be worse than it was in Barcelona, if they are now going to be using the new fuels, which presumably for the official tests they will. There's 6 days of running that they can exploit from now until the start of the season. Now, Ferrari apparently also overweight. They're looking to bring updates to Bahrain and Australia, including a new chassis to reduce the weight. So, again, just adds to the idea that, yes, probably the teams are struggling to get down to the weight limit right now. But that Ferrari was, as Auto Racer also described, born healthy. There was not really any performance running from the teams, although they did top the charts with Hamilton at the end of the weekends. The focus shifts to Bahrain. They're probably going to try the new fuels there. They better do. You've got to use them at some point, but they want to keep giving their fuel partner time to keep developing the fuels all the way up until it really matters. So potentially new aero parts, but the bottom line is the Ferrari ran pretty well. Komatsu was impressed by the engine. They did 150 laps, a record for Haas. They had a great finish to the weekend as well, or the week really, there in Barcelona. And that's what De Kester also describes. But it's not quite such a similar story with the power unit at Red Bull Powertrains. Now, from the Red Bull perspective, they had a very interesting week. They also did a ton of running, right? Red Bull were on track a lot. Racing Bulls, Red Bull Racing, they did plenty of laps. They didn't have too many issues, really. Their reliability looked very strong. George Russell noted it day one. It was like, wow, that was impressive that Red Bull did so many laps, given that they've got a brand new power unit that they designed themselves. But there is a little bit more to it than that, because We understand the other day that the engine might have been somewhat overheating. We know that there's that massive airbox on the Racing Bull that clearly is there because they might be somewhat concerned about the engine. The Red Bull doesn't really have that, which is expected as a customer, as a works team, right, rather than a customer team. But equally, there was a feeling that because they're not running the engines at maximum whack, the reliability of the Red Bull on certainly the older fuels was fine, but it was a little bit more touch and go than they expected. They could get the running in for sure, but their engine was running a little hotter. It was overheating a little more. We talked about that rumour the other day, and it shouldn't be a massive surprise, right? Brand new power unit manufacturer. They, of course, are going to run into some issues. The reliability looked good, sure, but can they be reliable and fast? That's another question. Now, there's another update here from Carlos Miquel, respected Spanish journalist, who said the reason for some of the incidents. Now, of course, we didn't really see all of them. Verstappen went for a spin on, I think it was the first day, went off at maybe turn 5. I think that's the corner where he crashed into Russell. There was another couple of incidents, I think, that Verstappen, might have been in the gravel one or two other times. And then, of course, the most notable one of the entire week was Hadjar in the wall at the final corner. And, the rumour about this is that, because also the Racing Bulls, they had a couple of off-track incidents as well. He believes, he understands, that the Red Bull Powertrains engine has a lot of lag. Now, presumably we're talking about turbo lag, but it could just be in general lack of responsiveness and drivability of the power unit. But of course, it's the first time Red Bull are making a V6 turbo, so as the exhaust fuels coming out of the engine spool up the turbo, that's why you get the delay, as what's known as turbo lag. There are very clever engineering ways to mitigate turbo lag to a great extent, but maybe Red Bull aren't as well equipped in those kind of technologies as some of the other teams are. So it's plausible that Hadjar and others, they, let's say he puts the power down, he doesn't quite get the response that he expects, he puts the power down a little bit more, and all of a sudden he gets a wave load of torque, the rear end steps out and he's in the wall, right? So that's something that's, because you don't imagine Hadjar's going to be pushing this car to the absolute maximum the first few laps. Obviously it wasn't the first few laps, but, it was obviously not a great time to crash given the circumstances. And he would have been taking things at least reasonably conservatively. So there's an idea, and we still don't know. Was it driver error, or did he get a massive spike, kind of like Carlos Sainz did in Austria last year? And that was still arguably Sainz's fault, not recognising what that Mercedes power unit was going to do underneath his Williams for the first couple of times. But it's also quite possible here that this might not have been Hadjar's fault. It might have been some issue with the engine, which is making the car a little bit difficult to drive. Now, maybe they can resolve that. They can, as we say, additional development and upgrade opportunities and all this stuff. That there's no engine freeze. They can keep working on it. But it means that the drivers might not have quite the confidence in the machine underneath them. They might not be able to run the car at maximum power because of the overheating stuff. They might have issues with lag in terms of power delivery. That can cause issues. If you get used to it, it's probably okay. I'm sure Max Verstappen won't have too many difficulties. But it is interesting because on paper, the power unit looks quite reliable. But then you consider they're not using the new fuels. It was probably overheating more than they would like. And they've maybe got this lag issue. It doesn't sound like a huge surprise that they're running into some problems. And if anything, they're still better positions than I think many of us expected. But it is clear that there are some problems for that team to resolve going forward. So very much enjoy your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.